Alrighty, football is back. We are back. This is Garrison, and you're listening to One Take, the only podcast created in one take. Buts, and confusion and everything. I'm not very good at editing, and therefore this podcast we made in one take. I don't know how long this will be. Try to make it around 15 to 20 minutes, but on tap, on schedule for today. I'm just going to talk about a couple things over this past weekend of college football. Again, we only had two conferences play. The SEC will be starting around September 26th, assuming that doesn't get moved back. Rumor on the street has it that the Big Ten is going to come back into the season around middle to late October. Now, this is all rumors. This is something I saw on Instagram today. Obviously, not the most reputable source. However, when you see these reports, people don't usually make them for random reasons. Now, you can make them. I understand there's fake news accounts everywhere, and it'd be a whole lot easier to make a fake news account than a real news account. I understand that, but I have a feeling the vote was held today, just like when the vote was held to cancel the season. News about news about the vote, actually what happened in the vote, got out early, and then they had to make an emergency announcement early because of that. I think that actually they had to make a revote just to do it again because they didn't want it getting out without being from a reputable news source. It was just a random guy who came out and made that claim, but he ended up being right. It looks like the Big Ten is going to be back, but for the purposes of this podcast, we're really not going to talk about the Big Ten or the SEC. Once those two conferences start playing, if they do, I'm assuming they will, we will certainly bring in the SEC into conversation and the Big Ten. Obviously, you cannot skip out on Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, and Florida. Probably four of the top 10 teams this year. If we're being completely honest, Florida's going to be a very good team this year, but we'll get into that when the time comes around. And obviously, having Ohio State in the Big Ten, the Big Ten is not a phenomenal conference. It's a pretty good conference, not phenomenal, but Ohio State in there. After watching the Fiesta Bowl last year, I mean, Ohio State is for real. This is no longer the Ohio State that you would have thought of a couple years ago when they got shut out 31-0 to Clemson and that type of thing. That is not this Ohio State team. This is not what you're seeing from the Ohio State program. And Ryan Day has done a phenomenal job in his first year, obviously going 13-1 last year, running through the Big Ten. And end up losing to Clemson in the Fiesta Bowl, but in an unbelievable game that really could have gone either way. If we're being completely honest, I think both sides would say that. But again, when we get to the part of the season where those two conferences enter into the season and they make some noise in the discussion for the college football playoff specifically, but also for bowl games and upsets and stuff like that, we'll talk about them. But on the schedule today, the first thing I just want to say is, man, it feels great to have football back. I know on Saturday I was studying for a decent amount of stuff this upcoming week. I got a couple papers to do. Have done. They're due this upcoming week. Got to refine them and make sure that they're good to go. Obviously, I have one on due Monday at midnight, and I have one due Wednesday at midnight. In addition to that, all that and two, there is an Econ 101 midterm on Tuesday from 11:30 to 12:45, I believe, during class. Those of you at Chapel Hill who have Econ 101 with Dr. Staub, I believe Dr. Balaban is doing the same thing. I'm not exactly sure, but if you have Dr. Staub, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It could be a rough one, not gonna lie, but I don't think it's going to be terrible. Not too bad, at least. It may be, but we will have to see when the time comes. We've had plenty of practice and a lot of worksheets. So all of you listening out there that don't exactly know what I'm talking about and thinking, how can a test be so hard? Maybe you're in high school. Trust me, college tests can be pretty difficult. However, there is a lot of study material, and I'm really glad I'm able to record this podcast. Having being in college, you have a lot more time on your hands, a lot more free time on your hands. And it's really about how you use that free time that determines the success. It's kind of like it's like the X factor. You have to have it. If you can use your free time in college to your advantage, you can really succeed. And I think that's a token to a lot of successful people. And you can use your free time and you can use that correctly to your personal benefit and not slack off with a lot of other things. It makes a big difference. But on top today, other than just having football, it was so great to see college football today, or on Saturday for that matter, and on Thursday as well. Miami opened up with UAB. By the way, more on that in a second. We talk about the ACC, the Miami. My goodness, I got to control myself when we get talking about Miami because I can get on a long tangent here about all these different things and Miami fans and all that stuff. But I'm gonna try to refrain there. That can be difficult sometimes. But really just felt so great to have meaningful football once again. Obviously, we had Army, or it was Navy and BYU on that last Monday on that Labor Day. holiday, and that was great too. But it wasn't really meaningful in the same sense that ACC and Big 12 football. We thought Big 12 football was meaningful, but we'll get to that in a second as well. But it really just felt so great to see Power 5 football again. It felt great to see teams that were really, really good play. Carolina played really, really well, I thought, on Saturday. In the fourth quarter, we didn't look terribly great at the beginning of the game. Clemson came out, I thought, looked really, really strong at the beginning, and they beat Wake Forest, not in the way that you would think as a huge win. But we'll get on that in a second. I'll talk about why Clemson doesn't necessarily put up the same amount of points and win by the same amount of margins you would think they would over some inferior opponents in the ACC. But we'll get to that in a second. So obviously, just great to have football. Now, let's dive into the absolute debacle that was the Big 12. For people out there, okay, and this could be for anyone, I do mean anyone, for anyone out there saying that the ACC is the worst conference in college football, that may have been the case in the past. It is not this year, and you will never, the ACC, every team in the ACC could lose the rest of their games. Well, actually, we're in a conference schedule, but still, you get my point. They could lose every single non-conference game that the ACC plays this year, and it would not matter. I refuse to say that the ACC is worse than any other conference. The Big 12 is by far the worst conference. It is not even close. And I really don't care what you say, because we're going to talk about a couple of things here. I'm pulling up the Big 12 schedule. I'm sorry for stalling. I'm trying to pull up the Big 12 schedule, and the interface on the ESPN website is so different than the ESPN app. I really don't like it. But okay, we got it up here. So TCU and SMU were postponed, and that's fine. Oklahoma came out and dominated Missouri State 48-0. That's perfectly good. That's what you expect. Oklahoma, number 5 team in the country, playing inferior competition. You know they're going to run up the score. You know they're going to put up a lot of points. Lincoln Riley's got a high-octane offense, and you know they're going to, they should dominate. This is what Oklahoma does. They will thoroughly dominate inferior competition. They'll probably run through the Big 12. One loss to a random team you probably don't think about, win the Big 12 championship, probably be a one-loss team at the 4th spot in the playoff, although that could vary this year just depending on how other conferences stack up and what the end of the year looks like, which is going to be such an interesting year because of the really strange schedules. But if Oklahoma does get in, they'll lose somewhere in the neighborhood of 60-30 or something like that, 50-35, because they don't play defense. But, I mean, you all know this. If you've been watching any football here the last couple of years, you realize that Oklahoma doesn't have any defense, and they'll run through the Big 12, they'll make it to the playoff, and they'll get blown out. That's what happens. It's like clockwork. You know, a broken clock is right 2 times a day. Think about that one. Another thing is Texas beat UTEP 59-3. That's what you would see. Now, this is after this, okay? So the top 2 teams in the Big 12, the flagship schools in the Big 12, really did well, and that's great. That's what they should have done. That's what a lot of teams that had the ability to win did, but not the other teams in the Big 12, and we'll get to that right now. Iowa State, first of all, what in the world are you doing, Iowa State? Iowa State, number 23 in the country. Matt Campbell is the head coach. I really thought for a while that they were on the right track, turning in the right direction, and they come out at home. Now, I get there weren't any fans. I get that. I completely understand. This was a weird off season, but it was a weird off season for everyone, not just Iowa State. I mean, it's a weird off season for every single team out there. And they lose 31-14 to something called Louisiana. Not Louisiana State. Louisiana. Not Tulane. Louisiana. Yeah, riddle me that one. In the Sun Belt Conference, I mean, it doesn't matter how good Louisiana is. It doesn't matter how good the North Dakota State is. Iowa State has no business losing to any inferior competition, especially from a group of 5 level conference. Iowa State is a better team than that, and they have no business losing to Louisiana. That is an absolute unexcusable loss. There is nothing you can tell me to right that wrong. Absolutely unexcusable. Cannot happen if you're Iowa State. We move on down here. Kansas State. What in the world are you doing? Arkansas State, for those of you who don't know, who may not have been able to tune into this game was on Fox. Fans there, by the way, Kansas State did something that I wish Carolina had done, and they allowed fans to come to the games, or at least students come to the games, and the parents of the seniors play. Carolina did let that happen. They didn't let students come in, but, I mean, there's only so much you can do. Certain schools are going to be more lenient than others, and trust me, we'll get to that down the road with FSU, because goodness gracious, there's a lot to talk about with Free Shoes University, but again, we will get to that in a second, and really exciting stuff. Arkansas State goes into Manhattan, Kansas, and really the score is not indicative of that game. Kansas State was up, and yes, Arkansas State had to make a game-winning drive. But if you tuned into that game at any time other than the late fourth quarter, Arkansas State really handled Kansas State on all sides of the ball. They took the crowd out of that game, and they really showed up and played a really strong game. I was really impressed with them. And I really do think that big things are ahead for the Red Wolves. Houston Baptist goes into Lubbock, Texas, playing Texas Tech, and they did not win. But Texas Tech, what in the world are you? Houston Baptist? I didn't know if this was the name of a school or a church. There's obviously a bunch of big churches in Texas, and Houston Baptist is obviously a Christian school, but you would think it sounds like a church. And if you're Texas Tech, how do you only beat Houston Baptist by 2 at home? And for those of you who are like, well, there's a lot of bad teams in the ACC too who are going to fight back and maybe type in the comment section, you know who you are. I mean, you could argue, well, there are bad ACC teams that lose to Group of 5 teams all the time, like Georgia Tech last year. Well, that's fair. But you're going to tell me that you're going to have 3 middle-of-the-road ACC teams lose to or 2 middle-of-the-road ACC teams lose to inferior competition, and 1 middle-tier ACC team lose to a university that sounds like a church? No, that does not happen. And then last but certainly not least, probably the most interesting game of the night, something that a lot of people really did not see coming at all. I mean, this was Reese Davis's super dog pick on College Game Day at 9 a.m. that morning. Actually, it would have been around 11:50 a.m. because that's when they do the super dogs before the picks, but that's neither here nor there. Coastal Carolina comes from Conway, South Carolina. For those of you who don't know, Conway is just above it's west of Myrtle Beach. It's actually, no, it's south of Myrtle Beach before Pawleys Island on right west of 17, a beach town in South Carolina. Really nice, not a terribly nice area, but really nice location being that close to the beach. And Coastal Carolina leaves Conway, South Carolina, and goes into Lawrence, Kansas, and dominates the Fighting Les Miles and the Kansas Jayhawks, winning 38-23. Again, another score that's not terribly indicative of the game. If you ever watched that game, there was no point in that game where you really thought Kansas had any chance of winning. And that's what we're talking about dominating. When you go into a stadium and you control the game from start to finish, in my mind, you have dominated the game regardless of score. The best example I can think about this was, if you remember, the 2018 Sugar Bowl between Texas and Georgia. That game ended up being a 7-point game, but anyone who watched that game knows that Texas thoroughly dominated Georgia on all sides of the ball. They were more physical than Georgia. They won the turnover battle. They shut Georgia down on offense, and they forced quite a couple fumbles on defense. And Georgia really didn't have a very good answer to a limited Texas offense, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, Ellinger is not bad, but Ellinger is more of a Tim Tebow-like. He probably won't pan out in the NFL. That doesn't mean he's bad. He may pan out in the NFL. He's going to take more work. He's one of those running quarterbacks. He's a little bit thicker of a blend of quarterback than most people would see. Not necessarily that it's a bad thing. It's just he can take a lot of shots. He's a little bit shorter, stockier. Can obviously get into the end zone. If you're on the 1 yard line, you don't hand it off to your running back. You keep it with Ellinger, and he dives into the end zone. Oftentimes it works. But he's not a bad player at all. But man, the Big 12 this weekend, a really, really bad weekend to start. Really not it's just not what you want to see if you're a Big 12 fan, and really hoping that maybe Oklahoma can get in with one loss. I think that was the most telling thing about this. With Oklahoma dominating against Missouri State and how bad the rest of the Big 12 really played, it's going to take a miracle if Oklahoma were to drop one game against one of these Big 12 teams to get in. I think that really hurt Oklahoma, because over time the Big 12 hasn't been horrible, haven't been anywhere close to the SEC or the Big 10, but they've not been bad. They've certainly been better than the ACC and the Pac-12. But Oklahoma this year, I just don't think they'll get that same benefit of the doubt, even when they lose. Like last year, they lost to Kansas State, but Kansas State wasn't a horrible team. And in 2017-2018 season, they lost to Iowa State at home, but Iowa State wasn't a horrible team. And the Big 12 as a whole wasn't awful, but this year is not the case. They're just not going to get that same benefit of the doubt this year. Now, moving on to the ACC. I'm pulling it up here on the ESPN.com. I try to remember all these scores, but I can't really. I mean, it's tough if we're being completely honest to remember all these scores. But I just want to go through a couple of main points here. Miami beat UAB on Thursday night. A solid win, 31-14 over UAB in inferior competition. Miami should have won. I'm not sold on Miami at all yet. I haven't been sold on Miami for a very, very long time, no matter how much they try to convince you with the new quarterback or the new defense or the new coach or the new chain or the new touchdown rings, which, by the way, are the stupidest things in college football. Actually, second stupidest thing. The Florida State turnover backpack is the stupidest thing of all time. And now they have a student manager who has to sanitize the backpack after every turnover, which makes it even more comical. But more on that in a second. Again, there's a whole lot of things you can tee off on Florida State here. It's like you're at a long drive competition and you're just waiting for people to smash the ball 400 yards. I mean, there's so many things that we can talk about here with Florida State, but trust me, we will get to them in a second. I know you guys are eagerly anticipating that. But in terms of Miami beating UAB, they did not look great. I'm not going to lie. I thought the performance for Miami was incredibly underwhelming. UAB was in this game for a very, very long time, and at the very end, they just gave out of gas. The talent difference between Miami and UAB is quite stark, if we're being completely honest. Miami has great talent. They really do. They're in the cream of the crop for recruiting. They're coming from South Florida. They get all the guys out of Pahokee, Belglade, Immokalee. What's another recruiting town down there? Not necessarily Clewiston, but around that area. We're talking South Florida towns. And I mean, you got a lot of great high school talent right in that area. Clearwater, that's another great one. A lot of guys in the NFL right now coming out of Clearwater in that area, in those surrounding areas, those small towns of Florida where it's so warm. These guys get to train year round, and they produce some of the best talent in the country. So Miami, not a horrible, not a horrible showing, but a very underwhelming showing. I'm going to give them a pass, though, on that because I really do feel like having a new quarterback this year and not having a very good offseason, not that Miami had a bad offseason, everyone had a weird offseason. This was a very strange thing where spring practice got canceled or at least stopped, and then summer workouts were different, and these guys got to wear masks, and you can only have athletes on campus, and students didn't know if we were coming back and all. I mean, there were so many things up in the air that it's just a miracle at that we're actually able to play this season, and who knows how long it's going to last. I really hope it lasts a long time. I simply don't know, but hey, let's just be glad while we have it. Let's be glad that it's something we have right here. Clemson goes into Winston-Salem and dominates really Wake Forest. Wake Forest didn't play horrible in the game, but Clemson just behind Trevor Lawrence, he's looking really, really good. Got that offense moving. Clemson's going to be very, very good this year. I think Clemson wasn't the greatest team last year. We weren't incredibly great. It's still an unbelievably good team. Don't get me wrong, but compared to the 2018, it just wasn't. It just didn't seem the same. But Clemson was an unbelievably. I mean, you make the national championship game to even lose the national championship game. So many people would trade spots with Clemson to be in that opportunity, even to lose it. And Clemson fans, we should never be complacent with that. That was an unbelievable season, should be relegated so. But if you look at this year's team, it has the makings to get right back to that position. And this team looks really good. Trevor Lawrence back there, I believe he didn't have any interceptions, had a couple of touchdowns rushing, which is perfectly normal, which is what you would expect. I mean, you get to the 1 yard line, and Clemson has a tendency to run ETN a lot during the game. And when that happens and you get down to the red zone, the entire defense sells out on the running back. The linebackers come up. And if you're on the 1 yard line, which you could, I mean, obviously when the linebackers come up, you could be looking for a quick slant behind that gap where the linebackers would have been had they not come up. But when you're on the 1 yard line, you just don't have a lot of space. You only have 11 yards to the back line. And with that, the read option becomes a great option because the defensive ends are going to crash on the running back, and then it basically gives your quarterback a walk-in to the end zone. So a really good idea there. Clemson's defense did not look terribly great. I didn't think our secondary was very impressive at all. It wasn't bad, but I do feel like if we were playing a better team, maybe they could throw the ball downfield, I think we could have gotten exposed a little bit more, which is understandable. Again, first game of the season. And Clemson didn't have 3 players in this game. I don't know if a lot of people knew that. The news kind of broke right before the kickoff, but we didn't have Darian Kendrick, who's a starting cornerback, Mario Goodrich, who's another starting quarterback, and it was one other guy. He wasn't in the secondary, but I mean, if you lose your top 2 cornerbacks in a position that's already pretty thin, I mean, you're playing backups constantly and everything like that. With the weird schedule, I'm not terribly worried about that right now. One thing I am concerned about a little bit, well, I'm not concerned about, but if you're a Notre Dame fan, you should be concerned about, was Notre Dame and Duke. This year, I mean, Notre Dame didn't look great. Again, you can't expect everyone to look great because of how weird the offseason was. I know I've been reiterating on that for quite a while, but Notre Dame didn't look terribly great. I'm not going to lie. Chase Bryce didn't play horrible. I actually think he played pretty well for Duke, but the problem was Duke. He's just got no help around him. The offensive line can't hold a pocket to save their lives, and it's really affecting him. I mean, how can you step in the pocket if you got people in your face every single play? But Notre Dame did win, and that was a good win for them. 14-point win. Not bad to start out the season. At least they won. There's a couple teams, i.e. Florida State, who did not win, but we'll get to them in a second. I might be saving them for last here. North Carolina beat Syracuse 31-6. North Carolina did not look very good coming out of the gates. I'm not going to lie. It looked very sluggish, looked like a very, very slow start. Now, granted, Syracuse is absolutely abysmal. Syracuse may be Arkansas level bad this year. They are absolutely atrocious on offense. Not a horrible defense, but I think that also gave way to North Carolina having a slow start on offense. That the defense for Syracuse actually looked maybe a little bit better than what they should have looked like. But North Carolina did have a great fourth quarter, covered the spread, won by 25, and keep moving forward in the schedule. Carolina's got Charlotte next week. Should be a win, and we'll start the meat of the ACC schedule. Louisville beats Western Kentucky 35-21 at home. Not too much to say about that. Louisville's not going to be a bad team. Louisville's got Miami next week, or this coming week for that matter. College game day is going to be there 7:30 p.m. on ABC. Should be an interesting game to tune into. We really don't know what we're going to get out of Miami against a halfway decent team. Personally, I think Louisville's going to come out and mop the floor with Miami. I really do, because I don't believe in the U at all. They're going to have to prove it to me. I bought into Miami way too many times, and they've let me down. And I am not going to go down that path again. I will not believe in Miami until they start winning. I mean, in 2017 when they had that great run, I still wasn't believing in them because they were a completely different team at home than they were on the road. But Louisville gets a good win, solid win at least at home. Pitt absolutely demolishes Austin Peay State in Texas, or in Tennessee. Austin Peay's from Tennessee, and they beat them. Pittsburgh won at home in Heinz Field, which was a good win for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is not a bad team at all. They're one of those middle of the road ACC teams, and they're not terrible. They got really solid defense. It was good to see them put up 55 points. Narduzzi, he's one of those coaches that seems to always get the best out of his players or whatever talent he has, kind of like an Iowa or a Michigan State. They just seem to get the best out of what they have, at least on the defensive side in terms of Michigan State. So there's not a whole lot of talent in Pitt, but a solid win nonetheless for Pitt, a really good performance. Now the fun part, and I might have to check in. I might have to cut time for my other sections, but Florida State. Whew. There are three main things I want to talk about with Florida State. One is Georgia Tech at home. How in the world do you lose to Georgia Tech at home? That is seriously, Georgia Tech is one of the worst teams in the Power Five, and it's not their fault. They're trying to integrate in a completely new offense. They have to integrate a completely new offense. That's going to take at least 5 years. You got to give Jeff Collins some time. You got to let him get his players in, because right now Georgia Tech's working with all of Paul Johnson's players. They're working with all triple option guys, and it's really hard to train that because to change that, because when you're recruiting for the triple option, you're recruiting a very specific type of player. You're recruiting short, fast players, and you're recruiting a very different type of lineman that's very good at dives. Georgia Tech, the offensive linemen are so used to diving forward and diving at people's feet, diving at people's knees, and cutting and cut blocks and stuff like that, which should be illegal, but with the triple option, so many bodies, you really can't see it a lot. It's going to take a while for them. But Florida State, first of all, you can't lose to Georgia Tech at home. You can't. Your offense has to be better than Georgia Tech's offense. Any offense has to be better than Georgia Tech's offense. That is absolutely 100% inexcusable. 100. There's nothing. I mean, this is just as inexcusable as Iowa State losing to Louisiana at home by 17. There is no rationale. There's no excuse. The Georgia Tech quarterback is terrible. He threw multiple interceptions to Asante Samuel Jr., who's the son of the late and great Asante Samuel, who played in the NFL, and there is zero excuse for that. Second thing I want to say is the Florida State culture. This is dictated by the coaching staff, and I know it's Mike Norvell's first year, and I know they had a weird offseason. I know they had limited spring practice, and I know he's trying to institute a brand new philosophy into the schedule. But you have to have a better control over your football players. You have to have a better ethical system set up to where your players do not commit egregious personal foul calls that extend drives, which are essentially turnovers in this case. You can't have late hits. You have to make sure your players are wearing masks on the sidelines. I mean, if you go back and rewatch this game, every time they pan to the Florida State bench, none of them wearing masks. You go to a team that actually knows what they're doing, like Clemson, who has a really strong culture set up with a good coaching staff and a fundamentally sound team, and you don't see that same issue. Florida State not wearing masks on the sideline, and you're really hurting. It's not a good look for Florida State. It looks like their mind is somewhere completely different than where they should be, and that's really disappointing. I really wanted to see a better thing out of Mike Norvell as he's trying to basically reconstruct the disaster that Taggart left the state of disaster that Taggart left the program in, and he's got a long way to go. And I really thought that having Georgia Tech as the first game of your era would help that, because Georgia Tech is a very, very beatable team. I mean, there's high school teams that could probably beat Georgia Tech. If we're being completely honest, the best high school teams, not any high school team, but the best ones could probably beat Georgia Tech right now just because of how many things they have going on. And you come out and you lose at home, that's really not a good look for FSU, and especially for a team that quits so easy like FSU does. It doesn't take a lot to get that team down, and man, losing Georgia Tech, that kills the spirit in the team. It's going to be up to Mike Norvell and his coaching staff to get them re-energized. But hey, that's why he's making millions of dollars a year, and the average Joe on the side of the street is not. And at those certain times, he's going to have to make the tough decisions. He's going to have to be the guy who stands up for the program, and he's got to answer the questions. But I mean, I guess we'll have to see what happens there. But really, overall, a really bad look for Florida State football. Now, the third thing I want to talk about Florida State. To all the fans of Florida State, those of you who are students, maybe alumni, maybe parents of players, what are y'all doing? What in the world? We are in a pandemic, people. It is a miracle that we got college football going on. It's a miracle we can play this. The players are trying so hard to be tested. They're trying so hard to play. We worked so hard for this, saying that the general consensus was we would be safe if you guys allowed us to play. And y'all go to this game and none of them are wearing masks. Not one person is wearing masks. You go back to, if you guys go back and rewatch this game, every crowd pan, for the exception of two in the game, for the exception of two, one was on the middle of the student section and the other one was in the box. I saw those were the two crowd pans I saw people wearing masks. Everyone else, not one person wearing masks, sitting shoulder to shoulder. Now, granted, they're still in their groups and the groups were separated by 6 feet, but I mean, come on, people. We got to wear masks. This is 2020. We got to be smarter than this. This is not that hard. Please wear a darn mask. We want college football to last the entire year, and it's only going to take a couple teams to shut this thing entirely down, to really shut a conference entirely down, and then the snowball effect occurs. The domino effect occurs. It only takes one, and here we go again. Not just one team, one player, one coach, one assistant trainer, one student athlete, or one student. All these things, it's so easy to get shut down. I mean, we saw what happened at Carolina. It wasn't a while. We were there for 3 weeks, and bam, clusters start popping up everywhere. We get some. So the third thing, what in the world are you doing, Florida State? Wear a darn mask. Please, we're asking you, for the love of all that's good and holy, please wear a mask so we can continue the season. The fourth thing is, and this will be the final thing because I want to touch on one other thing here before I sign off here. I'll try to cut this thing under 35 minutes. Not cut it editingly, but just try to stop talking here before 35-minute mark. Hopefully you're watching or listening to this while you're driving or something like that, because this will probably have a black screen on it, but that's because I don't know how to edit, but that's neither here nor there. The fourth thing is here, and the last thing is I reiterated, what are you doing with that turnover backpack? That was a symbol of the Taggart era. This is a new era. You have a new coach. You have a new philosophy. You have a new scheme. You got to restart. Florida State needs to burn everything from the Taggart era. There should be no residue of Willie Taggart at that program anymore. And you keep this stupid turnover backpack on your sideline for securing the bag. First of all, what is securing the bag? Second of all, what does it have to do to turnovers? Third of all, why do you have it on your sideline when you know people are going to touch it? And fourth of all, if you have to have it on your sideline, you understand how bad of a look it is. Why are you so worried about sanitizing the backpack and not wearing masks? Makes no sense. Looks like their priorities are put in completely different things. Florida State, Miami, they're teams that really worry. They're less worried about wins and losses and more worried about what they look like and how cool they look while they're doing stuff on the football field. It's really a sad thing, to be completely honest. People forget, and this is Florida State's fault completely. This is not the fault of the people, the general consensus of the society that we're in. People forget, though, that Florida State was a national champion in 2013 and was a really, really good team in 2013, an incredibly good team. I mean, they went to the national championship, basically ran through the entire ACC schedule, never were really tested. And that team led by Jameis Winston almost had everyone drafted into the NFL after the end of that year. It was almost like a 2019 LSU type deal where, I mean, they were just unstoppable. They looked amazing. But FSU's got a lot of problems right now. I expect Mike Norvell to fix them. I hope he does. But he's got a lot of problems on his hand right now. But that's enough for FSU. You can't even talk about FSU for too long because if you do, it starts giving you headaches. It's like drinking Diet Coke. The aspartame just gives you headaches and it drives you insane. Last thing here, I'm not going to talk about this for too long, but I just thought it was an interesting story. On Saturday, as I was watching a couple of the games, this is around noon. UNC Charlotte is playing App State on ESPN2. It was a strong game, pretty nice game. App State was in all black and Charlotte was in all white, and that's important, and I'll let you know about that in a second. It was misty. For those of you who don't know, here in North Carolina, we had basically tropical depression on Saturday for a little bit of time. Mainly it went away mid-morning to around lunchtime, and it was just kind of spitting rain and overcast and gloomy, but I guess it just got stuck in the mountains. The mountains almost have a completely different climate from the rest of North Carolina, but that has to do with the topography and how much more elevation there is up there. But App State's playing Charlotte, and I actually heard this cool story. The announcer was talking about it. Charlotte was wearing illegal jerseys. So in college football, the rules are for jerseys is if you have a light colored jersey, you have to have a dark number. And if you have a dark colored jersey, you have to have a light number. This does not, the border around the numbers does not count. So you can't have a white jersey with a black bordered number with a white number. It can't happen like that. You have to have a complete, solid, filled in dark number with a light jersey or a dark jersey with a light number completely. Well, Charlotte had white jerseys on, complete white pants and everything like that, white helmets, and were wearing really, really light gold, yellow numbers. It was very, very hard to see, especially from the broadcast. And they were talking about how it was almost impossible to see from the broadcast booth themselves, obviously, because you know how they're higher up, the camera zooms in. They were even higher up, and they could not see it at all. It must have been impossible trying to call out the names of the players for the plays. I wouldn't have been able to do it. Obviously I have glasses, and that's difficult, but I mean, I still think it'd be pretty difficult to call out those numbers, but they got through the game. And they said that what's supposed to happen is when you wear an illegal uniform, the referees are supposed to penalize you on the first play of the first half and the first play of the second half. Well, the referees let it go, and then as they delved into the story a little bit, they actually came across a fact that the moms of the team, a few of the team moms, sewed together the names on the back of the jerseys. They sewed the names of the players onto the back of the jerseys the night before the game, and they got the jerseys in at 10 o'clock that morning on Saturday. So you really can't blame Charlotte. They did all they could. This is an incredibly weird offseason. They literally had their moms stitch the names of their jerseys, or stitch their names onto their jerseys, and got their jerseys there the day of the game. And really an incredible story, to be completely honest, and really interesting. And this is why we love college football. You have these quirky stories. There's some heartwarming stories as well. I'm sure we'll get to those sometime in College Game Day here soon. as we progress into the season. But really just an interesting story there that I want to share with y'all. So yes, that is all for podcast number 1. Let me know how you guys liked it. Please put any ideas or comments or what you would like to see in the future in the comments below, and I will try to address those needs as they come in future podcast episodes. You could ask me to talk about certain conferences or certain teams or what I think the projections of this teams are going to look like and how the college football playoff race is shaping up. I will have some playoff preview stuff coming down the line, but it'll probably be around Thanksgiving, maybe a little bit past that, because the last playoff rankings, I don't believe, get announced until December 17th. So we have a little bit longer of a way. Plus, not all the teams have started playing yet, and a lot of stuff's going to change when the SEC starts playing, and if the Big Ten starts playing, it will change a lot. Nothing with the Big 12 though. You can write them off the script, for the exception of Oklahoma, but as we discussed earlier, Oklahoma, because of how bad the Big 12 is, has zero margin for error. So yes, just to reiterate, make sure you get guys, if you want anything for me to address in the future podcast, drop it down in the comments below, and I will see you next week for podcast number 2.